All right, so let's talk a little bit about Metroid Dread. It is out next week, and I'm very excited to pick this game up. It's going to be fun getting this big-time 2D Metroid game again on a home console with the Switch, and being able to continue the story from 2002 with Metroid Fusion. However, we have had quite the, the debate that's come up here, and even a bet now that involves Balan Wonderworld when it comes to the sales of Metroid Dread. And I wanted to go over specifically Metroid Dread's big challenge here in order for it to break that 3 million mark. Guys, if you enjoyed these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So Metroid Dread out next week, and I've been kind of looking at some of the other Metroid games to get an idea as to where Metroid Dread needs to kind of break through in a sense. And the good news with that is we're going to know pretty quickly if it does this. And if it is able to achieve some of these numbers, then I think it's going to be kind of a lock, and that Sean will be telling us all about Balan Wonderworld in a review. So let's first go over here and take a look at the overall sales of the franchise. And we can see at the top here, we have, this is just going in chronological order of release, Metroid on the NES. That sold 2.73 million. That is the best-selling 2D Metroid game. The best-selling Metroid game overall is Metroid Prime. That was on the GameCube, that being 2.84 million. So the reason we've come to the determination of 3 million is because I believe it will become the best-selling Metroid game even within the first year of its release on the Switch. So crossing 3 million units would pretty much make that confirmation overall, even within like margin of error or anything like that. But there's one issue, and that's that Metroid has kind of fallen off in the last decade or so, really, because if you come down here and look at how things have been going with Samus Returns in 2017, sold 600,000, 700,000 copies maybe overall from the time of probably when this wasn't stopped tracking, or even with digital copies and all this. Basically, we haven't had a Metroid game touch 1 million units since 2010 with Metroid Other M. And Samus Returns was kind of a weird situation, right? Because they revealed that after they showed that Metroid Prime 4 was in development, which got people really hyped up, and Samus Returns was coming out on the 3DS. The only problem is a lot of us had kind of already moved on to the Switch from that 3DS. I know it was like the first E3 after the Switch came out, so it's like 3 or 4 months after the Switch released, but a lot of us who had picked up a Switch didn't really want to go back to our 3DS later that year. I mean, it was such a downgrade at that time going back to the 3DS and the visuals there compared to what we were playing like Breath of the Wild on the Switch. So I'm not really surprised that Samus Returns got overlooked, because it's just like, why wouldn't that have been on the Switch? That was the question. They would show it and we'd say, hey, that looks great. Why isn't it on the Switch? And it's weird that they never even thought to maybe even port it over just to get it there ahead of Metroid Dread coming out. But Samus Returns did have an okay launch in Japan despite the overall low number when it comes to total sales globally. It sold roughly 30,000 units. That's the biggest thing here. Metroid is not a massive seller in Japan. In fact, it struggles in Japan, and that's one of the good things here is we're going to know very quickly if Metroid Dread is going to kind of stray from tradition with the sales for Metroid games, because we'll get those numbers 10 days after the game comes out, and we'll kind of be able to look at it and say, okay, you know what, Metroid Dread has something here, or, ooh, that might be falling back in line with some of these other recent Metroid releases. Like, if we take a look here, at about 30,000 units, which, according to Dengeki, they reported that that was about 70% of its initial shipment, which tells me even Nintendo realizes, yeah, Metroid, not the most popular game in Japan, but, I mean, if we look up and down the list here, Nintendo probably realized, yeah, look at these sales numbers, 30,000 units, that's what we could expect. Now, 70%, maybe they shipped out, I don't know, 45,000 units or something to stores, 50,000 units, something like that. But either way, Metroid Fusion, according to the charts here, is the best-selling Metroid game at all first week in Japan. We don't have the numbers for Metroid on the Famicom disk system. That was too long ago for them to be tracking. But with actual numbers for Metroid Fusion, nearly 50,000 copies, and that ended up being the best-selling Metroid game outside of, again, Metroid on the Famicom Disk System to date in Japan at 155,000 units. But that didn't necessarily translate over to being the best-selling Metroid game across the board. That's still Metroid Prime for a 3D Metroid game, and then Metroid for the Famicom Disk System for a 2D Metroid. I'm going to stick more or less to the best-selling Metroid game, that being Metroid Prime. So let's take a look at how Metroid Prime did in what should be Metroid's strongest area, and that is in the US, in America, because that seems to be where Metroid really moves units. And yeah, it is kind of especially with Prime, more of a Western series, because I know it's kind of deemed as an adventure game, but you look at it and yeah, it's also a first-person shooter, right? So that does work out very well for it in the West. And check this out. I found this. I thought this would be pretty fun to go over either way, because it is kind of cool to look back at some of these older sales charts. This is through Web Archive for GameSpot. And they had this up back in 2002, going over the NPD charts for the previous month with Metroid Prime and its launch. Now, you can see at the top, it was Grand Theft Auto Vice City on the PS2. That shouldn't surprise anyone. It's Grand Theft Auto. And after what we saw with Grand Theft Auto 3, there was a ton of hype around Vice City, and it actually kept its #1 spot even from the previous month. But look at number 2. It's Metroid Prime on the GameCube. Again, this being in the US. And then below that, we have SmackDown Shut Your Mouth. That was a debut month for that one at number 3. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4, going from 7 up to 4. Yu-Gi-Oh! Madden NFL 2003 on the PS2. Splinter Cell, the original Splinter Cell, on the Xbox. Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers on the PS2. Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. And then Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance. That's right. It debuted at number 10 alongside of Metroid Prime. See, that was the interesting thing about Metroid Fusion, is they released it months later into 2003. In Japan, they opted to push it out alongside of Metroid Prime in the US, mostly because I'm sure they had some data that said, yeah, it's probably going to sell better in the US. Let's get it out there first, and then we'll work to release it later. I know there was some compatibility between Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime as well, from what I remember. Either way, though, in the NPDs that month, we had 2 Metroid games that released in November, and they both charted in the top 10, which means if we're going to be looking towards any region to really hold up Metroid Dread, yeah, it's going to be in the US. So I would expect Metroid Dread to certainly find its way into the top 5, potentially top 3, since we had Battlefield fall out of October into November. And I have a feeling something like Far Cry 6 will most likely top the charts there. And then, of course, we'll roll into November where we'll have Call of Duty Vanguard probably take things the rest of the way into next year, even topping the chart over and over and over again. Metroid Dread has a good shot here to be up there for the NPDs, and it would pretty much have to, unless it can really have a big breakthrough in Japan. Now, Metroid Dread is also being marketed heavily next to Nintendo's new OLED Switch system. In fact, there are pictures of the OLED Switch in Japan and then Metroid marketing right next to it for Dread. So there's a chance people go in, pick up the OLED, and then kind of look around and decide, you know what? Metroid Dread is the brand new game out today as well. I might as well grab that. Yeah, we could see a nice push for Metroid Dread sales because that OLED Switch is right there with it. Now, we do have some other sales information for Metroid Dread that I'm going to go over a bit more tomorrow in Newswave, so make sure you check that out. But I am still of the belief that Metroid Dread is going to become the best-selling Metroid game to date, and I think it's going to do that very quickly within the first year, absolutely. And hey, can't wait to find out more about Balan Wonderworld from Sean later on next year. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.